So this all started 3 years ago in March 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Early March 22, we got the news that my eldest nephew, the eldest grandchild of the family, had been diagnosed with a very rare disorder, which is life limiting. Um, and essentially, we were told that there was no treatment and that this condition had a poor prognosis, and that from the onset of symptoms to death would be 10 years. And in terms of onset of symptoms, this would have been the first seizure that he exhibited when he was around 9 years old. So actually, my nephew was misdiagnosed with having epilepsy at the age of 9. And it was only when he was 15 in March 22 that he ended up having a prolonged seizure and started showing other signs and symptoms for the medical team then to further investigate and find that he'd actually got a condition called Lafora disease. Many people, I don't think, have heard of Lafora disease. I hadn't heard of Lafora disease. Lots of my friends who are doctors or are within the medical field hadn't heard of Lafora disease. It is very, very rare. At that time in 2022, I believe my nephew was the only case in the UK. So what I did was I just started looking into the condition and started carrying out research. I managed to get in touch with a doctor in the US who is actually the leading expert on Lafora disease.
Mm-hmm.
I also found out about a organization called Chelsea Hope. So Chelsea's Hope is a charity in America, um, and it's the biggest or the only charity for Lafora disease. So I got in touch with that organization. I also spoke to my kind of nearest and dearest and my inner circle, my close friends, and one of them messaged me and said, I've just had to think about what you've told me about your nephew. And I remember a number of years ago, I used to work as a carer. And I used to care for children who had something that sounds very similar to what your nephew's got. So would it be okay for me to get in touch with the mum of them children just to find out what condition they had?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, of course, like, yeah, if you can get some information from me, yeah, I'll welcome that. So she got in touch with the mother of them three children. Now, sadly, she lost all three of her children to Lafora disease. Anyway, she informed that mother that my nephew had Lafora disease, and she confirmed that her children also had Lafora disease. Now, coincidentally, it just happens that she also lives in the same city that we live in. I mean, what are the odds of that? So I said to my friend, would it be okay for you to ask her whether she's willing to come and see the family to just tell us what we're to expect? And she agreed straight away and said, well, of course, it only makes sense for me to come and tell you what I went through and to support you and tell you, you know, which way you're heading, what to expect, because this condition is cruel. These patients are really, really difficult to manage, and the change is going to be quick, and the changes will happen suddenly, and you're going to have to adapt as quick as you can. So she came over and gave us lots of information. And to be honest, this is what, almost 4 or 5 days after we've been informed of the diagnosis. So there's a lot to take in. And to be honest, I think at that time I was still, I mean, I'm still shocked by it now. And at that time it was really raw. And, she was just giving us so much information about what's going to happen, how they're going to deteriorate, how things are going to come to an end, the fact that he's now at a risk of, further prolonged seizures. And she did say that in Lafora disease, these patients, these children, they die of either a seizure that kills them, or they die of a chest infection that doesn't get better, because they are at a risk of aspiration because their swallow becomes very, very poor. And with all the information she gave us, there's a couple of things that stuck in my mind. So one thing she said was, now we know that this is not epilepsy. We know this is Lafora disease. And she goes, he is going to continue to now have prolonged seizures. So she said, next time he has a prolonged seizure, so a prolonged seizure is a seizure longer than 5 minutes, and that's what we call status epilepticus. So she goes, the next time this happens to him, you must let the A&E team know. So when you take them to the emergency department, just please let them know that this is Lafora disease. This seizure is part of Lafora disease, and that the medication that would normally be given as part of the seizure management protocol in A&E, some of the medications on that protocol actually make the seizures worse in Lafora disease. And she said that's what she experienced with her children. So, of course, I take that as very, very important information. She also says to me, when these children have these prolonged seizures, there's always something underlying that is driving the seizures. And she said that in her children, they would always have a chest infection. So she again said to me, when he goes to A&E, it's really important that a chest X-ray is done as soon as they can, because once they see on chest X-ray there's an infection, they can start treatment. The quicker you start treatment and the quicker you get on top of the infection, the less the chance that these patients will have further prolonged seizures, which to me just makes perfect sense, right? So on the 11th of March, whilst my nephew is staying with myself and my parents and my younger brother, he ends up having a seizure which lasts 17 minutes. I then take him to A&E because his parents weren't around, and I inform his parents that we're going to A&E. Once I get to A&E, I obviously recognise that the COVID rules still apply, and only one person can be by my nephew. And I thought, well, soon his parents will be here, and then I will have to leave the department. So this is my only opportunity to hand this information over that was given to me by the mother of them 3 children, which is, if he's now in A&E to have another prolonged seizure, and it gets past a certain time, and you start using the other drugs on that protocol, I've been told that some of those don't work. But anyway, at that point, his seizure had terminated. So it's not like any of the information that I was going to give them was going to then now have a direct impact on him, because it's not like he was still having a seizure. So it's not like I was obstructive or didn't allow them to do their job. I was just trying to pass the information over. The other thing I was trying to do was explain to them about the fact that they could have a chest infection and let's get the x-ray done. But unfortunately, for some reason, the staff in the department would not listen to me and were quite obstructive, and made comments such as, "You're not his dad. You surely don't know more about the condition than his father does. You don't have parental responsibility, so we're not going to listen to you." And essentially didn't listen to me. So we got to the A&E department at 10 o'clock. It wasn't until 12 o'clock that the attending doctor came to review my nephew. At that point, I honestly thought, okay, this doctor will hear what I've got to say, and I'll be reassured that somebody's heard what I've got to say. But when she came, she also decided to take the same stance that I didn't have parental responsibility. I clearly don't know more than the parents about this condition. She doesn't want to speak to me, and she was actually really rude and obstructive and quite aggressive towards me. I was visibly upset. I was confused as to why she was treating me this way, and I didn't understand why she wouldn't listen to me. And she just kept saying, "I don't want to talk to you. I've come here to speak to your nephew." And then she's trying to wake him up, and I'm thinking, if you want to take a history, take the history from me. I was with him for that period of time, and there is something called the collateral history. Take the collateral history from the person that was with him. I will tell you exactly what happened. I don't know why you're trying to take the history from my nephew, especially me knowing that he now has speech impairment, so he can't even formulate a full sentence.
And he's just had a seizure.
And he's had a seizure. And then she's asking him questions like, "Did you wet yourself?" And I'm thinking, that's not appropriate to ask him. He's already upset with what's going on. He's had this diagnosis. You don't need to ask him them inappropriate questions, right? Anyway, at that point I thought, I'm not going to get anywhere with this doctor. So I decided the right thing to do would be to escalate. And that's exactly what I did. I went to reception, I left the bedside, and I asked to speak to the consultant on call. In that time, my nephew's dad turned up. He went to the bedside, and the reception team managed to get the consultant over. So then I spoke to the consultant in charge. Again, I was upset, frustrated. I explained the diagnosis that my nephew had been given. I explained the information that was given to me by the mother of them 3 children, and I asked the consultant, had he heard of Lafora disease, and he said to me, I've never heard of it. This is the lead clinician that night in A&E telling me that he doesn't know what Lafora disease is. Anyway, after he heard what I had to say, he said to me, well, what you're saying is reasonable. Like, yeah, we can get a chest x-ray, and, what you're telling us about the medication, fine, we'll make note of that. I, at that point, said to him that I wasn't happy with how that doctor had treated me. I wasn't happy with her tone and her behavior, and I wanted to put in an official complaint against her. To which he said, well, you have a right to do so. He then said to me, look, your nephew's father is here. I can't have you by his bedside because of the one visitor policy.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I don't want you to just leave the department just yet. So could you please go and wait in reception just in case I need you again? And I thought, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Like, I will do as you say. So I went to the reception and I sat there. And you know what? I still remember looking up, and there was a camera right above me, and opposite me was a receptionist. And I just sat there, like, reflecting on the last few hours, visibly upset, crying, just trying to make sense of what was going on. And then I look up, and I see that doctor coming towards me. And as soon as she sees me, she starts having a go at me again. You must leave the department. What are you doing here? Why are you still here? Can you leave? And at that point, I thought, God, what is wrong with this woman? Like, what is her problem? So I just looked at her and I just said to her, I said, you need to go and speak to your boss. To which she responded, what do you mean? You need to leave the department. Like, thanks for bringing your nephew here, but you need to leave the department. I said, no. I suggest you go and speak to your boss. And this kind of went on for a couple of minutes. She kept telling me to leave, and I kept saying to her, go and speak to your boss. In that time, the consultant turned up just behind her. And as soon as he came, I just looked at him and I said, this is what I mean about your colleague's conduct and attitude towards me. I don't understand why she's behaving this way towards me. And now, once again, I'm telling you, I will be putting in an official complaint against her. And at that point, I asked for her GMC number and her full name and her position within the department. He then asked her to go back to her workstation, told me to remain in reception, and then about 5 minutes later, he came back and took me into a separate room. And at this point, I'm really upset, and he apologizes for what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
We have a bit of a chat, and he then says to me, well, now we've done everything that you've said, which we agreed to, which made sense, and I would now suggest that you leave the department. Yeah, fine. I will leave the department. Like, thank you very much for listening to me. I will now leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I leave, and I now wait for my transport to turn up to take me home. This was around 1:30 in the morning. So I'm on my way home. Around 2:15, I return back to the department because I get a phone call from my brother saying that my nephew has now woken up and is asking for his mobile phone. And it turns out that I'd picked his phone up and put it in my pocket. So I go back to the department. So I enter the department at 2:15. I'm back in that same reception area. The reception is just in front of me, and just behind the reception is where my nephew was. And it has now been about 45 minutes since I initially left the department. So I thought, well, maybe I should just find out whether my nephew is still in the department or whether he's actually been transferred to the pediatric ward. So I asked the receptionist whether she could find out if my nephew is still there. So she kind of goes off, returns after about 5-10 minutes, and then says to me, you're going to have to wait because all staff are busy to find out. And at that point, it was 2:30 in the morning. Honestly, I'm tired. I'm really tired. I'm frustrated. And then she tells me I have to wait. And at that point, I say, you know what? That I'm not waiting. And I go through the doors, go around the corner, and see that my nephew is still there. And I literally hand his phone to him, and I turn around to leave, and guess who's standing behind me?
That doctor.
That doctor is standing right behind me. So I then try to leave the department, and as I leave, she follows me and keeps making comments. Why are you back? Why are you here? What are you doing? You need to leave, blah, 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 right? Etc., etc. I then stop. I look at her, and I say, I've already told you I'm putting in an official complaint against you. I know people. Just wait and watch and see what's coming your way. And by that, Mazin, what I meant was, I know people within the hospital, I know people within the program, I know who to send my complaint to. So that's what I meant by wait and watch what's coming your way, because that's all my intention was, to put in a complaint. At no point have I threatened to harm her in any way. Um, so yeah, and then I leave the department. I've gone. So on the 11th of March, I've now left the department, and I'm very serious about my complaint. So I then start drafting my letter of complaint. I then spend the next week or so drafting my complaint letter. On the 17th of March, I had organised a meeting or organised a call with my program director. And this call was essentially to discuss taking some time out of training to kind of support my nephew and just to work out which way we were heading with him, because this was all new to us. During that call on the 17th of March, my program director informs me that the head of school, so the head of the GP school, has been in contact with her and has asked her to get in contact with me to find out what happened on the 11th of March at the emergency department at the Queen's Medical Centre. When she says that to me, I'm quite confused. So I say to her, well, what's this about? Because I've not even put my complaint in. I've not put my complaint against the doctor. So how does the head of school know that something happened, right? So I asked my program director, and she says, I don't know. She's just asked me to ask you what happened. So then I say, well, so then I explain to my program director what happened, and I also say to her that I'm currently drafting a complaint letter which is almost finished, and would it be okay for me to send her a copy of that? And I also said to her, would it be okay for you to then send this complaint letter to the head of school so that she can see what happened? Program director agrees to that. Anyway, we then have a further conversation on the 24th of March. This is where I message the program director and inform her that I have now completed drafting my letter of complaint, and would it now be okay to send her a copy of it? And she says, that's absolutely fine. You can send it to me, and I will also forward it on to the head of school. But just for your information, are you aware that there's a complaint against you? The police are involved. The complaint's gone to the GMC, and the complaint's also gone to the lead employer.
Wow.
At that point, I'm thinking, what is going on? Like, a complaint against me for what? Like, what have I done that the police have to be involved, the GMC have to be involved, and the employer has to be involved? And up until this point, neither of them parties have made any contact with me or have informed me. Yet, my program director knows about it. So again, I start thinking, how does she know? Clearly, the head of school must have told her, but then how does the head of school know? So then I'm thinking, is there something else that's been brewing in the background that I'm just not aware of? On the same day, after that conversation with the program director, I get a phone call from the lead employer HR assistant. She says to me, we've had a complaint about something that happened in A&E on the 11th of March. She doesn't go into what the complaint is, neither tells me who the complainant is, but says to me, can you tell me what happened?
Yeah.
I obviously naturally tell her what happened, which is how I was treated. And again, the way I told the program director what happened, I then tell the HR assistant what happened. And I say to her, I've drafted a letter of complaint against that doctor, so I'm guessing the complaint is from that doctor. So can I please send you the letter of complaint? She says no at that time and says, I need to now discuss this with the medical director and I will get back to you. The next day, I have another call from HR. So in that call, I'm informed that the medical director has decided to place restrictions on my training. Restrictions meaning I am only allowed to carry out non-clinical work from home. Therefore, I'm not allowed to go to work. Now, at that time, I was working in a GP practice near Matlock, which is miles away from the Queen's Medical Centre. Also, just so that people understand, the lead employer sits here, the I'm part of what at that point was the East Midlands Deanery, which sits here. Head of school is aware of what's going on because she has seen my complaint. Medical director here is saying, I'm going to restrict your training. And where I work, they are called the host organisations. My host organisation in terms of the hospital I worked at for my training was Derby, okay? And then I worked in practices around that area. I took my nephew to the Queen's Medical Centre. That is not part of my training. That is not my host organisation, right?
That's Nottingham.
That's Nottingham. That's separate. That's where I took my nephew. So he says, I'm going to restrict your training, so you're not allowed to go to work. And the reasons given to restrict my trainings is because he now deems me as a threat to my colleagues. At that point, my mind is blown.
Yep.
I work in this practice miles away. This is not an issue with the people I work with, nor is this an issue whilst I'm at work. Why am I now being deemed as a threat to my colleagues? I don't understand that. I still don't understand that. So that's what I get told. You're not allowed to carry out any clinical work. You're not allowed to go to work anymore, essentially. You must now do educational work from home. Now, I'm a GP trainee. At the end of the day, I'm in a training post. I need to be at work. I need to be seeing patients. I need to be at work to be doing assignments, assessments, to log onto my portfolio so that at the end of the year, I have evidence to show that I've met the criteria for that year so that I can progress in my training. But you're now telling me that I must stay at home. And there's very little I can do from home to provide evidence that I'm meeting those requirements to get to the end of the year. So up until the 28th of March, I've now been restricted from my training because of some allegation. I still don't know what the allegation is fully. I don't even think they've not sent me anything at this point. But all I know is the police are involved, the employers decided to restrict my training, and the GMC have been notified. On the 20th of March is when he first writes to me, which is a restriction letter. So the concerns that he then writes in the letter or the complaint of these 3 bullet points, this is the first time I've seen what the issue is. So first bullet point, it is alleged that you attended Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust, the Queen's Medical Centre, Emergency Department as a relative of a patient on the 11th of March 2022, during the course of which you were rude and increasingly verbally aggressive to staff members. It is said that this culminated in you making threats to the staff members' personal safety and life. The above concerns have been reported to the General Medical Council and the police. So when I read that, I think, okay, the General Medical Council haven't been in contact with me. The police haven't been in contact with me. And I didn't threaten somebody's safety and life, and I wasn't verbally aggressive and abusive. And actually, what evidence do you have for this? But you've decided to restrict my training. On the same day that I get this letter, I then get informed by the HR assistant that they have spoken to the police, and the police have said that they have been unable to get in contact with me. Therefore, the employer suggested that I make contact with the police officer myself. And in an email, I got given his name and his mobile number. Now, Maz, at no point did the police come to my home address. At no point has the police tried to ring me. At no point have any attempts even been made to locate me because the police haven't been there. And, now we're on the 28th of March. And I'm guessing the complaint went to the police on day 1, which is the 11th of March. So the police has had ample time to find me, yet have failed to do so. Anyway, the employer says to me, lead employer, here's the number, contact the officer yourself. So that's exactly what I do. I contact the police officer, and he states to me, yes, there's been a complaint against you, but I don't have enough information in that complaint to be able to arrest you. However, if you want to close this matter, then I advise that you come in for a voluntary interview, and we can put the matter to an end. I said, okay, fine, I'll do that. So what I then do is I get in contact with a law firm in Nottingham and get myself a solicitor. I ask her to contact the officer and to organise a voluntary interview. That's exactly what she does, and organises an interview on the 6th of April 2022. I also then inform my employer that I've organised the interview. Because, throughout the whole thing, I was regularly in contact, updating my employer, because that was the right thing to do, right? To engage with the process, just to ensure that I can get back to work. So we go to the interview. At that interview, or prior to the interview, he briefs my solicitor. So what the officer says to my solicitor is, if your client admits to using threatening language, I can put the case to an end, and I can just give a community resolution order, and that's it, case closed. So when my solicitor tells me this, I say to her, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to admit to doing something that I've not done. And also, I've already written a letter of complaint against her, which outlines exactly what happened. I've sent that to my program director. She sent it to the head of school. You, as my solicitor, has also seen that document. I'm not now going to sit here and say, no, actually, I did use threatening language, because that is not what happened, right? So, no, I'm not going to do that. So, in my interview, I just literally outlined whatever I'd written in my complaint letter. At that point, I've given my interview. The interview concludes with the officer saying, right, I must now speak to the complainant and see what she wants to do next. I said, fine, you do what you've got to do. He got back to me a couple of days later saying, I've spoken to her, and she's claiming that you're lying and that she has witnesses in the department to back her story and to back her complaint. I said, okay, you do what you need to do. He goes, yes, she's instructed me to carry out a full investigation. All right, fine, you, again, do what you've got to do. Anyway, so from that point onwards, the medical director writes to me every 4 weeks. And each time he sends me a restriction letter. And in each one, he continues to say, these are the allegations, which are the 3 points I read out earlier. Doesn't want to hear my side of the story because there now is a police investigation.
Yeah.
And he's just going to wait and see what happens, right? So, March,
Yeah.
April, May, June, July. We get to July. Every month he sends me restriction letters to say, you're restricted, you're restricted, you're restricted. On the 20th of July, I get another restriction letter. In that one, he states that the restrictions are to continue for a further 4 weeks. He's stating that he's got no reassurance that that behaviour won't be repeated. Again, behaviour that's not actually been proven to have taken place. On the 25th of July, I get a call from my solicitor. She tells me that she's had correspondence from the police officer stating to inform me that no further action will be taken. Reason being, no evidence. Basically, no witnesses came forward to support that doctor's claims that I'd threatened her. Now, at that point, on the 25th of July, I'm thinking, okay, thank Lord. Thank Lord that this is now over. We're now heading into August. For those of you that are doctors that are listening, in August, we have a changeover. So we change jobs. So I thought, this is probably the perfect time to get me back to work because, in August, we rotate our jobs. So it makes sense for me to fit into the next rotation, right?
And you were already out of work for like 4 or 5 months.
I've been out of work since March. So March, April, May, June, July. So that whole rotation, which at that time was a psychiatry rotation, I did not attend because I was not allowed to go to work. Because we changed rotations in April at that time. So I thought, well, at least I can start my next job. So I contact the lead employer, speak to one of their HR assistants and say, well, look, the police investigation has come to an end, so please, can I now go back to work? She states to me, we need to now discuss this with the medical director. So I'm thinking, well, it's the 25th of July. We rotate on the first Wednesday in August. We've got about a week. That's enough time for him to see that the police investigation has come to an end and he can get me back to work.
Yep.
Then I hear nothing. Right? So that first Wednesday of August has come and gone. Doctors have rotated, and I still don't hear back from the lead employer. And I'm thinking, well, the police investigation's come to an end. What next? We then get to the 16th of August, so almost 3 weeks later. That is when the medical director writes to me again and then decides to restrict my training for another 4 weeks. In that, he states, he's aware that the police investigation has come to an end, but he's still not satisfied. He now wants to carry out his own internal investigation. And at this point, he's asking me to comment on the issue at hand, to comment on the complaint. I then go back and say, well, up until now, I've only got these 3 bullet points, which is I attended QMC, I apparently made threats to the staff members' personal safety and life, and that the concerns have been reported to the GMC and the police.
Mm-hmm.
By this point, I've contacted the GMC. What the GMC say to me is, if you don't hear from us within 2 weeks, that means there will be no GMC investigation. And this was back in April. The GMC never got in contact with me. So all that tells me is that there is no GMC investigation, right? So then I go back and I say, well, okay, you want to hear my side of the story, but I don't know what the complaint is. So can you please now send me a copy of the complaint so that I can address whatever's written in that complaint? I get told in one email by HR that they don't have a copy of the complaint. Then I go back and say, well, that doesn't make any sense to me because you've received a complaint. Based on that complaint, you've restricted my trainings for all these months.
Mm-hmm.
We've now reached a point where the police investigations come to an end.
Yep.
You're now asking for me to comment on what happened or the complaint, but you're telling me there's no complaint. They then say to me, no, actually, there is a complaint, but we're not allowed to share it with you because the complainant hasn't given us permission to share it with you. So then I say, well, what exactly do I need to then respond to? Because there's not enough here. These 3 bullet points aren't enough for me to respond to. I then get another email, which then outlines how to write a statement and how to write my side of the story. And, it just lists how I should do it, mention who I saw, who I spoke to, etc., etc. So when I get that email, I think to myself, well, okay, fine. Basically, you're just telling me to outline what happened,
Which
I've already done.
Yeah.
Which I've already done because I've already written this 13-page document, which is my letter of complaint against that doctor.
Yeah.
So at that point, I think, well, all right, I'll just send you a copy of this. And honestly, at that point, I thought, right, head of school has seen it. She's not said anything other than being supportive. Program director has seen this. She's also read and thought, yeah, I know what's happened. I'm not going to say anything. So I thought when the medical director sees this, he will read this and think, okay, I can see what's happened here. He will also take into account that the police found nothing. Therefore, this doctor is telling the truth. Sagir is telling the truth. So I'm just hoping that, the next time he contacts me, he'll say, fine, you can go back to work. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Anyway, what I've also done at this point is I've asked for a copy of the policy that they're following because I want to really know what their kind of policy is and what they're doing. So I get sent the handling on concerns policy. On the 22nd of September, I get another letter. And this is another restriction letter. And he states, I'm going to restrict your training for another 4 weeks. So now I'm thinking, God, even this letter was not enough to get me back to work. So what's going on here? In this letter, he states, the reason he's given to restrict my training is because the statement does not address concerns regarding the alleged incident which took place on the 11th of March, where allegedly I threatened colleagues. So he's saying your letter doesn't address those issues, which doesn't make any sense to me because this letter outlines exactly what happened, right, from my perspective. So I don't understand what I've not addressed. Does he mean I've not admitted to using threatening language? Is that what he wants me to do? Say, yes, I did this. Well, no, I didn't, right? So in this letter, he takes it further and says to me, the statement that you have provided raises a number of clinical concerns regarding your management of acutely unwell children, which could have implications for patient safety. Honestly, at that moment, mind blown. I'm thinking, what was it that was in my statement that raises clinical concerns? Because there's nothing that I did that night that should raise any clinical concerns because I was not the doctor that night. I went into A&E as a relative, as the uncle of a really unwell child. So what is it in my statement, what is it in my letter of complaint against that doctor that raises a number of concerns about how I manage acutely unwell children? I did not manage my nephew. I was not there working as a doctor. At no point did I manage him. Yes, I tried to give information about the condition to the staff, but that was for them to take the information and then use it how they thought best. At no point did I impose that on them. At no point did I say, you must do this and try to obstruct their work. All I tried to do was hand the information over. So I did not understand what he meant by that. Now, at this point, I thought, right, you need to do something about this. And I had actually already been in touch with an organization called Every Doctor. Every Doctor is a campaigning organization fighting for patients, staff, and the future of the NHS. So I got in touch with the CEO of Every Doctor. I briefly told her my story, and she said to me, right, I'll get you in touch with my team. She then got me in touch with, and I would call her Dr. M, right? Dr. M is a doctor, and she's also a barrister, okay? So
2 in 1.
2 in 1. The Dr. M knew what was going on. So when I got this restriction letter, the September one, I reached back out to Dr. M and I said, right, this is something seriously not right here. Can you please help me? She said, right, can you please send me all the restriction letters and also your letter of complaint against that doctor, and let me write to your employer. What M then did was, she went through my statement, took out all the kind of the finer detail, looked at the restriction letters and the allegations, and then produced this 17-page document, which she sent to the lead employer, okay? Basically outlining the allegations and how there's no evidence and how I deny it, and then concludes the letter by stating that, you know, they need to get me back to work, and how this had been a very traumatic and stressful experience for me, and how it affected my mental health, how it had delayed my training, and how this had caused me financial loss, and that, you know, at this point they should get me back to my training post, to get me back to work. Okay. This document is dated the 17th of October 22. Right now, from the 22nd of September to the 17th of October 22, which I'd say is what, 3 weeks. He states that these are these clinical concerns, and he's also put in that letter that he's going to hand these over to the head of school to discuss in an educational meeting, right? So in that time period, we're trying to now organise an educational meeting to address the concerns. I've still not had sight of what these concerns are, right? Again, was a bit confusing for me because the head of school had already seen this letter of complaint I had written. At no point does she raise any concerns from my letter, and she's had it since March. Yet now you're saying, after reading it, that there's concerns, but you're going to hand them over to the head of school to deal with the concerns. Okay, fine. So the head of school did get in contact with me at the end of September and tries to organise a meeting to address these concerns. For one reason or the other, that we don't get to meet up. We then scheduled to meet in October. But by this point, before that meeting takes place, Dr. M has now sent this letter to lead employer. As soon as the medical director sees this letter, I get a phone call from HR saying that the medical director has now taken the decision to revoke my restrictions and I can now go back to work. At that point, I thought, right, what has actually happened? What's happened between the 22nd of September and now for him to change his mind? Because this letter doesn't add anything extra. It essentially just outlines what I've already written, but takes out a lot of the emotive bit and just goes through his restriction letters. So what's actually changed? Because I've still not admitted to anything. There's still no evidence, and he states that he's still not satisfied that I won't carry out the behaviour. How is he now satisfied, right? At that point, I thought, well, something clearly isn't being done properly here. So I said, yeah, okay, fine, thank you for letting me go back to work. Then I get an email saying, I don't think this meeting needs to happen to address the concerns. So at that point, I go back to the head of school and say, are you sure about that? Because these are serious clinical concerns about how I manage pediatric patients. I want to know what these concerns are. You know, are you happy with me going back to work as head of school and dealing with pediatric patients when he is stating that there are serious concerns? She says, well, that's something I need to find out, and I'll get back to you. Anyway, so I was told I could go back to work on October the 17th. I didn't actually go back to work till November the 14th. In that period of time, I keep emailing the head of school, asking when this meeting is going to take place, and also asking if she could send me the concerns. I want the list of concerns so that I can have time to reflect and think about them before I go to the meeting. No, she ums and ahs and, you know, doesn't send me anything. Then on the 3rd of November, I get the final letter from the medical director, and this is a letter of advice. In that letter, he says, I have a concern regarding your clinical knowledge relating to the care of fitting children arising out of the detailed statement you provided to me about the incident. So now I'm further confused because
Now he's talking about clinical knowledge.
now he's talking about clinical knowledge. Yeah. So first he says there's a number of clinical concerns regarding the management of acutely unwell children. But now he's saying he has a concern regarding my clinical knowledge relating to the care of a fitting child. Okay. At this point, I still have not had sight of what the concerns are. I go back again to the head of school and say, can you please send me the list of the concerns? Finally, around the 17th of November, she sends me an email with the concerns. These are clinical concerns. These are also meant to be concerns regarding my clinical knowledge. Right, Maz, when I read them concerns, my mind is blown even further. So when I have sight of these concerns, I get this email on the 17th of November. We have a meeting scheduled for the 24th of November to discuss the concerns. And again, these are meant to be concerns around my clinical knowledge and a number of clinical concerns regarding the management of acutely unwell children. Again, I was never the doctor that night, so again, I don't know what he's on about. Anyway, when I read the first concern, and I read it out exactly what was written, whether it was appropriate to contact the mother of the 3 children who had died from the same disease suffered from by Sagir Hanif's nephew when his nephew was acutely unwell due to a seizure. This could have significantly distressed the mother. So when I read that, I was even more confused. How has this got anything to do with my clinical knowledge? And how is this a clinical concern? Who I contact in relation to my nephew has got nothing to do with my work, has got nothing to do with me being a doctor, and has got nothing to do with him. So I replied back to the head of school and say, he raises clinical concerns, he raises concerns about my clinical knowledge. I don't see how that statement and these points align. She states, if we try and be too reductive, I don't think we will get a satisfactory outcome, and I am keen to call this matter to a close as soon as possible. To which I then responded, I am also keen to call this matter to a close as soon as possible. And at that point, I said I'd want to bring Dr. M to the meeting. I was told it wasn't appropriate to bring her, and therefore I then said I want to record this meeting and I want to bring my program director to the meeting. They agreed to both, said, yes, you can bring the program director and you can record the meeting, but you cannot share the meeting, record a meeting with anybody without their written consent. Fine. Then I attended this Teams meeting on the 24th of November with the head of school, with my program director present, and all 4 clinical concerns were put forward. I address each concern and highlight that I don't see the clinical relevance. I don't see how this has got anything to do with my clinical knowledge. Therefore, can she please explain it to me? She isn't able to explain it to me and states to me that she's just doing what the medical director has told her to do, which is to address the concerns. To which I then say, fine, you've addressed the concerns, I've responded and given you my answers. I don't see the clinical relevance. Therefore, all I can say is that these are just vexatious claims. And we left the meeting to that. She then said, well, on reflection, what I'm hearing is that if you're in the same situation again, you would do the same thing again. To which I responded, yes, I would do exactly the same thing when it comes to my nephew. I would again take advice from somebody who knows about that condition. But the only thing I would do different is that next time I ended up in A&E, I'd make sure there was a camera around my neck so that I can record what actually happened. And we left the meeting. And that was the end of that. Now fast forward, a few months later, on reflecting on everything that happened, I decided to put in an employment tribunal claim against the employer. So we put in claims for race discrimination, sex discrimination, discrimination in association with a disabled child, harassment, and a violation of Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, which states that individuals have a right to a private life. We are claiming that my human rights were violated. So we submitted our employment tribunal application in March of 2023. We had a hearing listed for December of 2024. So almost a year and a half later, we went to court in December of 24 with a 4-day hearing. I'm not going to go into, the nitty-gritty of what happened in court, But what I can say is that I have been cross-examined. They've done their bit. I was cross-examined for 5 hours. Um, so my case is now closed. So the next step would be to cross-examine the respondent. But once again, I've managed to get the judge to grant them a postponement. So we are now back in court in May of 2025. So one would ask, why am I sharing this information? What is the purpose of this? Now, the thing is, Maz, I am actually a very private person. And for me, this is very, very uncomfortable. I feel very, very exposed. And this is not something that I wanted to do. I mean, even yourself, like, I've told you stuff was going on, but you have not known the details of what's been going on because I've kept it to myself, and only a very few people have known what's been going on about the case. But now the respondent has left me no choice but to get my story out. And essentially, we need money to get to the next step of this case. So yeah, we have a crowd justice page. You can find a link to that page at the bottom of this post. We need to raise a lot of money to get to the next stage of this case. And the thing is, Maz, this is not just my case anymore. This is a case for all them doctors who have been treated like this by the NHS, by their employer. This happens all the time. It happens all the time. But the thing is, trainee doctors stay quiet because all you want to do is get out of training.